Hi, I'm Catherine Ibrahim, and I'm doing my report on adolescence and suicide. Adolescent suicide has affected my own life. When I was a sophomore in high school, 4 boys committed suicide in the span of 1 year. And I often have wondered why they chose to do that. But also as a future teacher, I hope to not only learn what signs of suicidal ideation to be aware of, but also how to bring awareness of the issue to my students, their parents, and the community. Suicide among adolescents is a public health issue, and that's part of the reason why I chose to research it. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24 in the United States. And in Utah, it's the 2nd leading cause of death for Utahns ages 10 to 24. Suicide rates have been on the rise since the turn of the century. In the United States, in 2000, the average age-adjusted rate of suicide was 10. In 2013, it was 10.9. However, in Utah, in 2013, the average age-adjusted rate of suicide for males was 24.9, and for females, it was 7.6. Deaths from suicide are only part of the problem. Each year, approximately 157 youth between the ages of 10 and 24 receive medical care for self-inflicted injuries in the emergency rooms. And according to the Utah Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, over a quarter of Utah's high school students reported being sad or hopeless. So this is females and this is males. So that's the 25%, the average between the two. But 15.5% seriously considered suicide, 12.8% made a suicide plan, and not on this graph, 7.3% attempted suicide 1 or more times, and 2.1% suffered an injury. Why are the suicide rates in Utah so much higher? Utah's suicide rates are consistently higher than that of the national average, and there's been a lot of hypotheses put out there as to why there exists this paradox in Utah, because we have been named the happiest state on earth, but we're also the state that prescribes the most antidepressants. So some of those hypotheses are altitude, which changes our brain chemistry, specifically the levels of dopamine and serotonin. It's also been hypothesized that troubles during pregnancy and childbirth lead to suicide later in life, and Utah has a high birth rate. Some have pointed to the Mormon influence as part of the reason, and also there's a lot of gun use and gun ownership in Utah. So Utah is part of what some call the suicide belt. These states here in the red are what's the suicide belt, which is Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, and off of the mainland is Alaska. So clearly it's not just a Utah problem. However, all of these hypotheses, none of them have conclusive evidence that links them directly to suicide, so you have to keep that in mind. This is just another graph about comparing rates of suicide in Utah to the U.S. average. The bottom row here are females, so the purple is the U.S. females and the yellow is the Utah females. And this orange color is the U.S. males and the blue is the Utah males. So as you can see, both male and female are higher than the national average. But you'll also notice that there's a big disparity between females and males as far as suicide rates go. So there are clear gender differences. Boys are more likely than girls to die from suicide. In the 10 to 24 age group, 80% of those suicides were males and 19% were females. Girls attempt suicide more often than boys, however, and it has been estimated that girls complete 1 in 25 suicide attempts, while boys complete 1 in 3. So some of the risk factors I'm going to talk about risk factors of suicide, but before I do that, it's important to keep in mind that suicide is a complicated issue, and there's generally not just one risk factor that can explain all suicidal behavior in adolescents all the time. The single most significant risk factor is a mental disorder. Mental disorders can emerge from an environmental stressor, changes in brain chemistry, and also genetics. And 90% of suicide victims are believed to have had an untreated or undertreated mental disorder at the time of their death. Some of the other mental health disorder risk factors include a previous suicide attempt, and on that note, a previous suicide attempt is the #1 predictor for males, and then the #2 predictor for girls for a completed suicide. Agitation, anger, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse, disruptive behaviors like conduct disorder and severe impulsivity are among the mental health risk factors. Some other risk factors that are not related to psychiatric conditions are social pressures like unemployment and poverty, trouble with the law, failure in school, social isolation, a recent stressful life event, or a recent loss like a death in the family, a divorce, or a breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Exposure to violence in the home or in the social environment, bullying and harassment, and this is particularly true for the LGBT adolescent community. Physical or sexual abuse, access to handguns, and the suicide of a close family member or friend, which they call suicide contagion. Suicide contagion is a real thing, and so it's important for the media to be careful on how they portray suicides in the media so they don't dramatize it and make it look glamorous for adolescents. And also, if there's a student that commits suicide, schools need to offer on-site counseling, but I propose that they should also offer group counseling like in homeroom classes. That way more students are getting access to some counseling. So what are the warning signs of suicide? The American Association of Suicidology put out a mnemonic called "Is Path Warm?" It stands for ideation, either threatened or communicated, substance abuse, excessive or increased, purposelessness, a feeling for no reason for living, anxiety, either in the form of agitation or insomnia, trapped, feeling as if one has no way out, hopelessness, the feeling that nothing will get better, withdrawal from friends, family, and or society, anger, either in the form of uncontrolled rage or revenge seeking, recklessness in the form of risky behavior, and mood changes, either dramatic shifts from positive to negative or from negative to positive. Some of the other warning signs beyond that little acronym is suicidal talk. So if they talk about wanting to die, that's a very big warning sign. Preoccupation with death or dying, and if they start giving away their prized possessions to friends and family members. Because teachers have a day-to-day contact with students, they can intervene when they suspect a student is at risk. So if a teacher observes any dramatic or sudden changes that have affected a student's attendance, performance, and or behavior should be taken seriously. Teachers should know the warning signs of suicide, and they should also know the school's responsibilities if a student's at risk for suicide. Teachers should always encourage their students to confide in them, and they should refer and escort a student if they have communicated a desire to die. Teachers can also join the crisis team assigned to the student, and they should always advocate for the child and make sure their threats are taken seriously. So there are a lot of preventative measures that can be taken to help curb suicide rates, but preventative efforts need to ideally include the family, schools, the community, and mental health partnerships. Despite the myth that simply talking to adolescents about suicide will put the idea into their head, one study showed that not asking depressed adolescents was actually about suicidal ideation carried more risks than not asking. Some schools have offered suicide preventative measures in the school curricula, and a lot of other schools have proposed it. These focus on self-esteem and mental health issues, as well as stress management and coping skills. One particular thing here in Utah is called Hope for Utah, and the Provo City School District has implemented this organization. So Hope for Utah is a peer-to-peer training. They train students to recognize warning signs in depressed or suicidal peers and empower them to report these signs to an adult. In this Provo City School District, they used to have 1 to 2 suicides per year, but since they implemented this program starting in 2005, they've had no completed suicides, and 250 students have been referred for help. Another preventative measure that needs to be done, and I don't think that it has, is removing the stigma of suicide and mental health issues in our society so more people feel comfortable seeking the help that they need. And also another preventative measure called mattering, which is the belief that one makes a difference in the lives of others. So as adolescents negotiate their place in the social order, failing to matter to others may make the adolescents vulnerable to serious thoughts of self-destruction. One research study did a study on mattering and suicidal ideation, and they observed a clear correlation between mattering and suicidal ideation. So as a sense of mattering increased, suicidal ideation decreased. In conclusion, there's no clear-cut answers about how to change the unfortunate number of suicides each year, but however, I believe that because mental health issues are linked to 90% of the completed suicides, we need to allocate more resources to help identify adolescents with these issues. We need to make it easier for depressed youth to seek out help, and we need to change the stigma and shame that surrounds mental health issues by talking openly about them within our communities. And we need to allow adolescents to feel safe to explore their identities without diminishing their sense of mattering within our communities. And above all, we need to express to all adolescents that they are loved. And here are my references. Thank you.